Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. The Sun Moon Empire had a lot of confidence in their overall strength in this war. The invention of linked soul tools gave them an absolute advantage. However, in terms of high-level fighting strength, the Sun Moon Empire didn't have enough to defeat the Doluo continent's 3 native continents, and Shrek Academy by themselves. Therefore, they had to rely on the Holy Ghost Church's power. The Holy Ghost Church was very formidable. Without discussing other things, the existence the Death God Doluo, Yishishure, and the Dragon Emperor Doluo, Long Xiaoyao meant they had 2 ultimate Doluo. That was enough to intimidate countless powerful title Doluo. From Juzi's perspective, if there weren't any unforeseen incidents, there wouldn't be any problem with Yishishure standing guard at the Mingdo mountain range. But who knew that the Star Luo Empire managed to break through in the end? Afterwards, the White Tiger Duke had used a very venomous strategy, and Juzi was still held back no matter how powerful she was. The White Tiger Duke had dispersed the Star Luo Empire's Soul Master legions, and deployed 5 legions with 30 soldiers in a team, which formed one unit. He divided them to go deep into the Sun Moon Empire to destroy things. They focused on destroying the Sun Moon Empire's granaries and armories in their respective cities. The Star Luo Empire had almost as many Soul Masters as the Sun Moon Empire did, and they didn't have many Soul Engineers. However, Soul Masters were as destructive as Soul Engineers when they unleashed their destructive power. There were at least 150 units of Soul Masters scattered into the Sun Moon Empire's territory. They retreated after an assault wherever they were attacking, and they immediately escaped beyond the horizon. They didn't give the Sun Moon Empire a chance to surround and kill him. They were practically engaging in guerrilla warfare, and they caused many losses to the Sun Moon Empire after little more than a month. The Sun Moon Empire's royal family had to pull back a few Soul Engineer legions because of that, and to defend their territory. They even deployed 2 of their Royal Soul Engineer legions, which were like their trump cards, so that they could surround the Star Luo Empire's units and establish defensive perimeters. Only then were they able to suppress the Star Luo Empire's Soul Masters that were undercover in their territory. But they were in a standoff at the moment. The Sun Moon Empire could only produce large amounts of aerial surveillance soul tools and rely on their surveillance to fight against the Star Luo Empire's Soul Masters in their territory. However, aerial surveillance soul tools were expensive to craft. The Sun Moon Empire's territory stretched over many kilometers, so they couldn't possibly cover every inch of land. Otherwise, the White Tiger Duke's strategy wouldn't have been so hard to deal with. Nobody was a match for the Death God Doluo in face-to-face battle, but the Death God Doluo was just a mortal, and not actually a god. She couldn't stretch her strength to cover overly large areas. The Soul Masters who were undercover in the Sun Moon Empire preoccupied them, while the White Tiger Duke himself led his remaining Soul Master legions to create defensive structures and perimeters at the Mingdo mountain range with the Star Luo Empire's northwestern field army. They regained everything that they had lost before. The Sun Moon Empire could only maintain their current situation because the Star Luo Empire was holding them back. They didn't have more strength to continue their invasion, and this was especially so because the Sun Moon Empire didn't dare to attack in Shrek Academy's direction. Even the Holy Ghost Church were fearful of Shrek Academy. The Doluo continent's 3 native empires knew about Shrek Academy's battle against the Great Star Do Forest's Beast Wave, and the Sun Moon Empire had also received similar information. Xu Qianran turned pale with fright when he heard that Shrek Academy had pushed back the Great Star Do Forest's immense army, and when he heard that the Dragon God Doluo, Mu Yen, had reappeared. The Darkness Holy Dragon, or the Death God Doluo, Yishishure had told him long ago that everything between them could be discussed or worked out, but they would never directly participate in attacking Shrek Academy. Xu Qianran didn't have those 2 ultimate Doluo in his war against Shrek Academy. As of now, he didn't have any confidence in fighting an open battle against Shrek. Juzi personally returned to Radiant City, and they went through a series of military conferences after a deep chat with Xu Qianran. They finally decided that they should stabilize the current situation and consolidate, and that they had to assimilate as much of the territories that they had conquered in the Heavenly Soul Empire as possible. The commander that Huo Yuhao admired and respected was actually Zhu Zi. Her reputation in the Sun Mu Empire was growing exponentially throughout this war. The Sun Moon Empire's current situation wasn't as good as it was in the beginning, and that was because the death god Doluo hadn't been able to defend the Mingdo mountain range, and had nothing to do with Zhu Zi's war strategies and tactics. The Sun Moon Empire had conquered 2/3 of the Heavenly Soul Empire's territory, with minimal costs and losses by following Zhu Zi's war plan. She had earned a lot of credit for the Sun Moon Empire's glorious victories, expansion, and conquered territories. This was especially so because she had feigned an attack against the Star Luo Empire in the beginning, when her real target was the Heavenly Soul Empire, and when she made sure that the Star Luo Empire's intel and surveillance were locked down. She had accomplished great feats. Zhu Zi had been lauded as the Sun Moon Empire's military genius after the war, one who only appeared once in a blue moon, and even the Queen's halo wasn't as bright as her own commander's. Zhu Zi had increasingly more authority and influence. Besides the Sun Moon Empire's royal legions, the other 4 beast-ranked Soul Engineer legions were under her control. She was the commander-in-chief of the great army that was invading East. Xu Qianran trusted Zhu Zi the most, and that was the reason why he was very assured that she held all the authority. She didn't disappoint him. After conquering large areas of the Heavenly Soul Empire, Xu Qianran was very supportive of penetrating those territories with soul tools and technology. Xu Qianran admired and respected Zhu Zi, and he knew that he couldn't devise such strategies by himself. He held her in very high regard. This time, she had discreetly led an army of 20,000 to the Heavenly Soul Empire's northeastern region to investigate some mineral resources in the north. What were wars fought with? They were fought with resources and money. The Sun Moon Empire had been accumulating reserves for many years, and they were considered sufficiently prepared. However, Huo Yuhao had shaken them at their very core after the massive explosion that he had triggered inside Radiant City. Money and resources were continuously expended after the war started, and that was especially so for their rare metals. They were starting to run low. Therefore, the Sun Moon Empire had been trying to strengthen their search for mines and minerals recently, especially within the Heavenly Soul Empire. They would undoubtedly excavate and mine anything they discovered as quickly as possible. Zhu Zi had received reliable reports from her people in the Heavenly Soul Empire saying that there was an enormous mine in the Heavenly Soul Empire's northern region, in the areas bordering the extreme north. There were more than 10 veins of rare metals that they could excavate there. She had sent someone to investigate the matter previously, and the report was confirmed. This mine was very close of the Douling Empire's northern borders, and it was positioned between the Heavenly Soul Empire and the Douling Empire. Before the Sun Moon Empire had started this war, the Heavenly Soul Empire and the Douling Empire had just discovered the existence of this mine. They hadn't had time to excavate it before the war had started. Therefore, the Sun Moon Empire would likely clash with the Douling Empire if they wanted to mine these resources. The Sun Moon Empire had very formidable tools for detecting rare metals. Zhu Zi had instructed experts to do a serious investigation of this area before coming here, and her experts had told her that this mine held an extremely large volume of rare metals. If they could extract it, they would have enough to support another war. Zhu Zi had reported that to Xu Qianran once she managed to confirm those reports. Rare metals had undoubtedly become the most important resource after accompanying soul engineers into the history of war. Xu Qianran wasn't assured at all to leave such important resources in the hands of just anyone. He decided after discussing with Zhu Zi that she was to personally lead the Fire Phoenix Legion here, and she was to be in charge of excavating this mine. Besides this army of 20,000, there was to be an enormous team of excavators that would arrive later. However, they were going to mine in the extreme north, and the weather would greatly affect the speed and progress of excavation. The team needed time to prepare. Therefore, Zhu Zi came first so that she could conquer and assimilate this entire place before making other plans. Huo Yuhao wouldn't know about all this if he had left with Nan Qiuqiu before. Destiny worked in such mysterious ways, and a single episode of deep meditation created an opportunity for him such that he could do reconnaissance like he did. How could she not be dejected? She hadn't accomplished her true aim of being here, and yet she had sustained such heavy losses. It wasn't hard to imagine how expensive soul detectors that were equipped to beast lord rank legions were, and even she couldn't bear a 60% loss. This was a colossal blow. Furthermore, she couldn't fathom what kind of soul master could achieve this feat, if that individual was a soul engineer. Not even the Sun Moon Empire had any results in using soul tools for the art of concealment. Juzi didn't believe that the Doluo continent's 3 empires could surpass the Sun Moon Empire in this respect. If a single soul master did everything by himself, then wouldn't this soul master's abilities be far too powerful? He could conceal himself, and he could unleash ice-type soul skills over large areas. She had never heard of any titled Doluo that could achieve all that. Pass down my orders. Everyone in the Fire Phoenix Legion is to move at once. Everyone will hold oscillation detectors to search within 30 kilometers of the army camp. However, don't affect Dragon City, so that we don't affect our plan to assimilate the city through our technology. Yes. Her subordinate soul engineers acknowledged at once and departed swiftly. Juzi frowned tightly as she calculated in her head, and considered where that person who was investigating them came from. The Heavenly Soul Empire shouldn't have any strength left to conduct such reconnaissance in the northern regions, and they would definitely use an individual with such impressive scouting abilities on the battlefield. The Doling Empire was in the same situation. They were teamed up with the Heavenly Soul Empire, and their army was in a standoff against her own army on the battlefield. They wouldn't have anybody to deploy into the northern regions. She hadn't even attempted to excavate those mines yet. There was only one other possibility besides these 2 empires. The person who had just come to investigate came from one of the Heavenly Soul Empire's reclusive sects. This was the only plausible explanation. Juzi felt a headache come on when she thought about reclusive sects. As of now, they had conquered more than 2/3 of the Heavenly Soul Empire's territory, but the Sun Moon Empire had also sustained heavy losses. Their greatest losses weren't in the war instead. Their greatest losses occurred when they were fighting those reclusive sects. The Heavenly Soul Empire had a long history, which could be traced back 10,000 years. Back then, the Heavenly Soul Empire was still called the Heaven Do Empire, and this empire was formed by the Heavenly Soul Empire and the Doling Empire. There were many soul masters in the Heavenly Soul Empire, and there were many reclusive sects as well. Even though these reclusive sects didn't want to have anything to do with the Heavenly Soul Empire in normal days, the Sun Moon Empire was their enemy in the end. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, and they had to work together against their common enemy. Reclusive sects were always very secretive with what they did, as they focused on protecting themselves. They were always doing hit-and-runs against the Sun Moon Empire, and that highly irritated her. Even though these people didn't have a decisive impact on the war, they were consistently causing damage to the Sun Moon Empire. They had appeared in the Mingdo mountain range before, and now they had appeared far into the Heavenly Soul Empire's northeastern region. It seemed like this sect, who was adept with the art of concealment and reconnaissance, didn't just have one person who was good at these things. What was more frightening was the ice-type domain attack that had a reach of 1,000 meters in diameter. Based on this range, that person should be a powerful titled Doluo. Titled Doluo were always terrifying as an enemy. A titled Doluo was just one person, and his powerful strength, in addition to the fact that he was hiding in the darkness, meant that he was a threat whenever and wherever. Even if this person didn't care about lashing out against normal soldiers, he was still a great threat to the Fire Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion. Without talking about other things, this person would destroy every single one of their aerial surveillance soul tools if he attacked a few more times. He could cause her entire army to go blind. Juzi's hands gradually clenched into fists. Cold light flickered in her eyes. She had to find a way to remove this threat, no matter what. Huo Yuhao had already returned to Dragon City at this point. The soul-stirring thrill from before was just another unimpressive experience among all his past experiences. He returned to the cloth store. Nan Xiuqiu was still awake, and was waiting in the courtyard for him. "Why did you take so long?" she asked with a frown. Huo Yuhao said, "The situation is more serious than I had imagined." The Sun Moon Empire's Fire Phoenix Legion is hidden amidst the army of 20,000. Nan Qiuqiu was thrown into shock. How could she not know about the Fire Phoenix Legion? What are they trying to do? She said nervously. Do they wish to destroy Dragon City? If a legion with an overall fighting strength, such as that one, wanted to cause destruction, destroying an entire city really wasn't anything much. Huo Yuhao shook his head and said, how can that be? If that were the case, then they wouldn't have to expend so much energy to penetrate Dragon City with soul tools and technology. However, I wasn't able to discover their goal. Nan Qiuqiu frowned and said, then what should we do? We should continue investigating and figure out what's happening. There must be something they want, with such a powerful soul engineer legion around. Huo Yuhao stared at her with a strange look in his eyes. Yes, investigating is the right way to go. But there's no we, there's only me. Nan Qiuqiu's eyebrows immediately went vertical. What do you mean? You intend to abandon me and go alone? Huo Yuhao said sincerely, Qiuqiu, did you notice the disturbance outside just now? Nan Qiuqiu was momentarily stunned and said, I didn't hear any disturbance, but I did see faint flickers outside the city. That was you. Huo Yuhao nodded as he recounted his experience in detail. I managed to escape, but by a hair's breadth, with my own abilities. If you were with me, neither of us would have been able to escape. Huo Yuhao spoke with a very pained look on his face. Nan Qiuqiu was rude and unruly, but she definitely wasn't unreasonable. She stared at him and said, you can't put it like that. Are you saying that I'm a burden? Huo Yuhao said nothing, and he just stared quietly at her. Nan Qiuqiu was a little embarrassed and annoyed at his stare. She grunted furiously and said, fine, so I am a burden. I won't follow you, then. But since they have already discovered you, their defenses will be much tighter. How are you going to find out what they want? Huo Yuhao said, I wanted to find intel directly, but since I can't do that, then I can only follow them. Since they have come all the way to the northern regions, their destination can't be far. I will definitely be able to find out what they want as long as I follow them. Don't worry, I will be more careful with the lesson I've just learned. Nan Qiuqiu contemplated for a while. Even though she wasn't convinced, she had no choice but to admit that she was a lot weaker than Huo Yuhao was. Huo Yuhao would be burdened if he had to take another person with him. All right. You go, then. I'll wait in Dragon City for you, and we'll head to our own destination from before after you come back. But you must be careful. Huo Yuhao laughed and said, Qiuqiu is a reasonable lady, indeed. Don't do that. I'm going to sleep. Hurry and leave if you must. Nan Qiuqiu turned around and went back to her own room after that. Huo Yuhao heaved a sigh in his mind as he watched her elegant profile. Qiuqiu is a nice girl, and I can't let her become like Qiuqiu back then, no matter what. His heart began to ache when he thought about Wang Qiuqiu. Dorma should still be alive no matter how her situation was, but Qiuqiu was already. This had become an agony deep in his heart that would last forever. Huo Yuhao sighed as his thoughts stopped here, and returned to his own room. After this night's hustle, the Sun Moon Empire wouldn't move out throughout the night, so it wouldn't be too late for him to follow them in the morning. Huo Yuhao snuck out after finishing breakfast the next day. Nan Qiuqiu didn't escort him out, but she sulked in her own room after he left instead. Am I not just a little weaker than you? I'll catch up to you. Nan Qiuqiu decided that she would go into closed-door cultivation during the days that Huo Yuhao wasn't around, and she began to work hard inside the cloth store. Huo Yuhao left the city through the eastern gate, just like he did the previous day. He returned to the forest that he was hiding in previously. He wasn't hasty to go out this time. Instead, he began to meditate in the middle of the forest as he observed the movements of the Sun Moon Empire's army in the distance. He wasn't stupid. He had dealt such a heavy blow to the Fire Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion the previous day, so the defenses within their army camp had to be incredibly strict. He would be going to certain death if he took the risk to investigate at this time. Since that was the case, he chose to observe from afar, since his aim was to follow them anyway. The maximum range of his spiritual detection meant nothing could possibly go wrong if all he wanted to do was follow an army. Only if the Sun-Moon Empire could redirect all their aerial surveillance soul tools to his location, so that they could conduct surveillance closer to the ground across all positions, could they possibly discover his presence. There wasn't much disturbance within the Sun-Moon Empire's great army. Everything seemed very calm and peaceful one day after, as if nothing had happened last night. Huo Yuhao was very patient. He wasn't flustered at all as he just cultivated quietly inside the forest. He would just wait it out. His enemies weren't hasty, so why should he be? He simply used his spiritual power to detect in a single direction from time to time, and he would sweep over the Sun-Moon Empire's camp to make sure that the Fire Phoenix Legion was still around before he continued cultivating. He had gained quite some inspiration from last night's battle. Furthermore, he had been focusing his energy on studying ultimate ice over recent weeks. That was something that needed a lot of time for him to slowly grasp. At the same time, he needed time to absorb the manifold mysterious ice essence in his body. Cultivating anywhere made no difference to him. As for the exposed outdoors, that was a piece of cake. 3 days passed like that in the blink of an eye. The Sun-Moon Empire finally couldn't stand the loneliness anymore, as they set off to depart. Huo Yuhao had to admit that this army was very outstanding. They didn't create much of a disturbance as they moved out, and their formations were very neat and strict. The army on the periphery began to move first, and they took down their tents, while the soldiers responsible for impedimenta took everything apart and packed it up. The soldiers formed up in neat lines as they proceeded towards the north. Huo Yuhao quickly saw the Fire Phoenix Legion's team. The Legion's members were also walking on the ground, and their formation was very neat. They didn't act all high and mighty just because they were soul engineers. They can't hold back any longer. A faint smile appeared at the corner of Huo Yuhao's mouth as he stood up. He wasn't worried at all. He couldn't follow too closely, as he would be easily discovered if he came too close. He just had to follow them from several kilometers out. With his imitation, those aerial surveillance soul tools in the sky couldn't possibly discover his presence as long as he maintained a sufficient distance. Huo Yuhao followed far behind once the army had completely uprooted and moved on. He didn't follow behind them for long, proceeded on their flank as he gradually shifted forward. He knew that for him to complete his reconnaissance mission, or even to ruin the Sun-Moon Empire's mission, he had to allow his enemies to lower their guard first. Therefore, he couldn't allow his enemies to discover his presence, no matter what. His enemies would believe that he was already gone, given enough time, and that he had never returned after escaping the other day. As for making a move, he wouldn't do anything unless as a last resort. Huo Yuhao followed at a distance just like that. The Sun-Moon Empire's army continued pushing forward as they went straight towards the north. The army was moving very quickly. They were almost always jogging. They would jog for an hour before they walked for a bit, and then jog again. This army was moving at a spectacular speed, and their overall quality was very obvious. The army went 100 kilometers north after one day. The air was starting to become increasingly cold. They stopped to set up camp and cook food. Huo Yuhao hid behind a small hill. The weather was cold, but that didn't affect him at all. However, he couldn't help but swallow some saliva as he stared at the smoke spiraling from the army camp in the distance. Drinking some hot soup in such snowy lands would be so luxurious. I'm just doing hard labor now. He couldn't help but laugh bitterly as his thoughts stopped there. However, he could only continue, since he was already at this stage. Huo Yuhao laid out his map as he leaned against the hill. He had prepared this map long ago. It wasn't a map of the Heavenly Soul Empire's northern region instead, it was a detailed map of the Doluo continent's northern regions. He had spent quite a lot of money to get this map. The map itself was made from goatskin, and it was tough and soft at the same time. It could be preserved for a long time. Huo Yuhao scrutinized the map for a while when he discovered that the Sun-Moon Empire's army was still going northeast. They would reach the border between the Heavenly Soul Empire and the Doling Empire if they went further in the same direction. They would also be bordering the extreme north there, and it would be even colder than it was here. The temperature there was no small problem for typical Soul Masters, but could normal soldiers really bear it? Huo Yuhao turned around as he contemplated, and he lay on his stomach on the hill as he gazed at the Sun Moon Empire's camp in the distance. He activated spiritual detection, at the same time as he swept in toward the army camp. He quickly discovered that something else was happening. The Sun Moon Empire's camp seemed to be handing something out, and their soldiers were all lined up to collect those things. Everybody was to collect 2 items that resembled small boxes, and cotton-padded clothes. The cotton-padded clothes seemed decent in quality. That was especially so for the cotton shoes. They were very thick and sturdy, and Huo Yuhao could tell that they would be very good at retaining warmth. It seems like the Sun Moon Empire have long been prepared. These soldiers are probably decent at resisting the cold, so the Sun Moon Empire can't have deployed soldiers from their own northern territories. Since that's the case, and in addition to the cotton clothes that they have prepared, they will actually be able to resist the severe cold for a short period of time. Huo Yuhao went through the night amidst the chilly winds. He understood during what those boxes that were given out to the soldiers did the next morning. Every box was about the size of a palm, and the soldiers placed them in their clothes. These boxes were very closely pressed against their inner shirts and tied around their waists. When they began to march, Huo Yuhao immediately realized that the boxes emanated gentle heat. The heat coursed throughout the soldiers' bodies and helped them resist the external cold. That works. Those tiny boxes should also be soul tools. If that was the case, the box definitely needed sealed milk bottles inside. Maintaining the heat didn't need too much soul power, but Huo Yuhao could tell from the size of the box that it could only be sustained for a few days before it had to be charged. Huo Yuhao thought carefully for a moment, and he couldn't help but concede his enemy's ingenuity. The Sun Moon Empire's army was following a formidable Soul Engineer Legion, and the Fire Phoenix Legion had at least 300 Soul Engineers, while charging those small milk bottles didn't need too much of their soul power. When the army was resting at night, every Soul Master would be responsible for some soldiers' sealed milk bottles. Naturally, they would be able to charge all those milk bottles that way. Huo Yuhao hadn't expected the Sun Moon Empire to have developed soul tools for commoners to use. If, one day, they could find something to substitute for milk bottles, the Sun Moon Empire could truly conquer the entire continent, because that would be the time when normal soldiers could become Soul Engineers, and they would have a Soul Engineer's attacking power. Huo Yuhao thought about it. How frightening would it be if 100,000 Soul Engineers appeared on the battlefield? Huo Yuhao heaved a faint sigh inside. He shook his head as he accepted this reality in exasperation. It seemed like the Doluo continent's 3 native empires had to accomplish great feats, as soon as possible, if they wished to fight back against the Sun Moon Empire. Otherwise, within 100 years, even if the Sun Moon Empire didn't launch an invasion, their technological advantage would become increasingly evident. The Doluo continent would finally belong to them like a meal on a lunch plate. Huo Yuhao was lamenting inside, but he had to continue following them. He was still following far behind them on their flank, and he followed the army forward towards the Heavenly Soul Empire's northeastern region. The Sun Moon Empire's great army moved slower as the weather became colder. The place that Huo Yuhao had estimated they would reach within a day took them 2 days. Everything was white and snowy around him, and the cold winds howled through the air as they cut like blades. There wasn't much moisture in the air in a snowy place like this, because any bit of water would be immediately frozen. The temperature here was at least 30 degrees below zero, and normal people would find it extremely difficult to survive in such an environment. It was almost evening when the Sun Moon Empire set up camp once more. Their camp was a lot more compact compared to before. Furthermore, Huo Yuhao realized to his surprise that the layout was also different. The Fire Phoenix Legion, who were originally in the innermost sections, were shifted to the periphery. They formed an arch as they directly faced the northwestern winds, as if they were alpha wolves guarding their companions from the most bitter chill. The commander's tent was apparently right at the front, and it didn't move at all even when the cold wind blew against it. The other tents were tightly and neatly arranged in rows behind them. This was the layout that could preserve as much heat as possible. The spiraling smoke had disappeared by now, and he could see hot air rising from some large tents. There was no doubt that the army cooks were located toward the center, and not on the outside. Otherwise, starting a fire would be very difficult in a place like this, where water turned into ice. Huo Yuhao heaved another faint sigh in his heart. I have been freezing for a day, and I should also get a sip of that hot soup. Even though I'm not afraid of the cold, I have been exposed to the weather in this snowy place for days. These days haven't really been comfortable at all. However, Huo Yuhao could tell that the Sun Moon Empire's army wasn't that far away from their destination. That was because they were always traveling toward the northwest, and now, they were near the extreme north's borders. They would enter the extreme north if they continued forward. Huo Yuhao had been in the extreme north before, and was thus very clear on the dreadful conditions there. Normal people would definitely not survive in a place like that, and that was the case even with cotton-padded clothes and soul tools that provided heat. Even soul masters couldn't go deep inside if they didn't have a certain standard. Furthermore, there were many ice-type soul beasts that lived in the extreme north. They borrowed strength from their surroundings, and they were much more powerful than typical soul beasts. The Fire Phoenix Legion would run out of strength no matter how powerful they were if they ran into a pack of formidable soul beasts. Huo Yuhao could faintly guess that the reason why the Fire Phoenix Legion was involved in this operation was likely to be because their abilities had something to do with fire. Fire-type abilities would be greatly limited in a place like this, but fire-type abilities were also good at resisting the cold. The more he thought this way, the more Huo Yuhao felt that the Fire Phoenix Legion wasn't directing the Sun Moon Empire's army here to battle. They were here for something else. Huo Yuhao continued to think as faint light flickered. He hid himself within a small depression in a mountain. He didn't have any fire-type abilities, and having something warm in such a snowy place was completely impossible. However, he had his own methods. He retrieved some dry rations from his storage-type soul tool before he placed them on his right hand. A strange scene occurred. The tough dry rations in his hand gradually became soft, before they began to emanate a faint warmth. Huo Yuhao hadn't wasted his time in the extreme north over the past few days. His understanding of the element of ice had become increasingly deep, especially in terms of controlling heat. Ice needed a lot of heat to melt. In the same way, water-forming ice would release large amounts of heat. Huo Yuhao leveraged this principle as he sealed off the air around him before he began to control his blood and condense it into ice. This naturally released heat. Such control shouldn't be too difficult for a person with spiritual power as powerful as his. However, the dry rations would only be a little warm and soft. He had to eat them quickly. In the end, he couldn't let the blood in his hands freeze for too long as he could swallow those dry rations. Huo Yuhao swiftly dealt with dinner as he prepared to meditate once more. However, right at this moment, he suddenly realized to his surprise that something was happening in the Sun Moon Empire's army. The Sun Moon Empire began to erect thick metal pillars around their camp in the dark of night. Some of the Fire Phoenix Legion's members clad in dark red armor were hard at work, and they were flying through the air as they arranged those metal pillars according to their designated locations, before certain individuals would hammer them into the ground and stabilize them. Normal people would need many large machines to complete a task like this. However, this wasn't much for soul engineers. Soul engineers were soul masters first, and they could rely on auxiliary soul tools for aid. So they found such tasks very easy and casual. It didn't take long before they were almost done with their job. Have they arrived at their destination? Huo Yuhao observed closely. There was no doubt that these metal pillars were brought with their storage-type soul tools. Every pillar seemed about 50 meters long, and had diameters of more than 3 meters. It wasn't hard to imagine their weight. They were not only brought by storage-type soul tools, this had to be done with high-quality storage-type soul tools. What is the Sun Moon Empire doing here? Is this where they intended to be? What can there be in the barren extreme north? Huo Yuhao had many doubts in his mind. However, he could only continue observing. At least, he was sure of one thing, that the Sun Moon Empire wouldn't create a fortress here like idiots. The enormous metal pillars weighed at least 5,000 kilos, and several high-tier Seoul engineers had to work together to arrange and install them properly in the ground. 7 or 8 pillars were quickly drilled into the ground, and every pillar was at least 30 meters deep, while 12 meters remained above ground. This video will end here.